Cost of Victory, Book 1 of the Unseen Scar series by C.R. Saxon. Chapter 10. A second message surprised Ferdinand after the ship departed. Mother Artemis requested his presence. From North Oishi, he'd travel home with Zinko, Rayoni, and Evelyn. There, he'd meet up with his family and continue on to Chuzo's capital. Why this sudden change? Facing any Artemis, after all those things he said to John at the hospital, why would they want him? But he was excited to see how Evelyn was doing. It hadn't been long since he left her to the Artemis's care, and she was happy whenever they talked over the screen, but... Ferdinand hid the pain his words caused him. And this woman, she's the most wonderful of all. Like your own grandmother, she loves everyone unconditionally. This woman everyone calls Mother. She's the only person who can compare to how amazing your grandmother was. She's the only reason I've ever been jealous of John. Smiling sweetly, Ferdinand kicked himself inside for this last thought. It came unbidden, and slipped out before he could stop his tongue, but he couldn't deny the truthfulness of it. Gloom filled him just thinking about it, a gloom as deep and angry as the music screaming in his ear. He didn't deserve to see her. Regardless, he couldn't turn down an order from Duchess Samoltz, and there was something else he hadn't done yet. Quickly he sent a confirmation message and informed the porter of the change. If nothing else, getting off the boat a day sooner was nice. Being trapped in tiny cabins, unable to run, wasn't something he was fond of. The skeleton removed 3 of the 4 shirts he wore and kicked off his shoes. Grabbing a blanket, he lay down on the cot and closed his eyes. The harsh tunes did little to keep him from falling asleep, deep and dreamless. Might as well get this done. The extension on coursework was nice, but that meant what precious time John had with his family would be tainted. Luckily, he had 4 days before arriving to get as much done as possible. Since one of the tasks was picking a song, he could listen while programming. More than once he had to skip the music. These songs, they grated against his nerves. How was any of this noise music? Better yet, how would any of it help them with the welcome show? One song played after another. Even the ones not bad enough to skip weren't exactly enjoyable. Altogether, the music was pretty distracting. An hour and a half should have been more than enough time to finish this program and allow him to start on the next. But, where did he get this? John considered shutting the whole thing off. Listening to anything while working was a bad idea. Then, soft thunder rolled through a foggy night and out of the earpiece. John braced himself. If the other songs were any indication, singing would start soon. Yeah, the voices. There was no way any of this was worship music. It sounded wrong. But even if it was, why not get better singers? And the instruments, whatever they were playing, always stepped up, becoming harsher and more grating than the voices, if that was even possible. But the song continued, and no singing came. It sounded... Piano keys struck, meshing beautifully with strings. Those keys danced high, then slowed to a deep waltz. Mournful, yearning. Tears filled John's eyes. All he could think about was the first time he stepped on a boat without his family. Long days and weeks and months of tears and isolation. Would he ever see them again? Then he finally made it back home, only to leave again. It was harder the second time, and the third and the fourth. Past and present swayed around each other. When had that heartache lessened? When did it become bearable? And how? The music slowed, every note poignant, unmistakable, like sapphire on white silk. It captivated him, especially that piano. His parents' faces came to mind, as did each brother. That ache, those notes dredged up every second of longing, of loneliness. Pausing the song, John dried his face. Minutes passed. For all his years of piano, nothing had made him feel like that. If sorcery was a song, this was it. But he wanted to keep listening. It was amazing, music that elicited such emotions. Why hadn't he heard it before? John needed to know. Pulling up the information attached to the file. The symbols. There were 2 sets. One looked familiar to what appeared on Oya's screen when John spoke. The other didn't look too far off from one of the languages he knew. Sucking in a breath, John steadied himself. He only knew one ancient language, but he should be able to figure this out. Trying it in his mind a few times, John gave it another go. Beethoven. Beethoven? Who's that? That was a word he'd never seen before. But he was curious. The music. He wanted more. Copying the symbols, John pulled up another screen and started a search for their language of origin. He then took note of the song. There were still a few more to listen to, but he didn't want to abuse his ears any further. Pounding woke Ferdinand, but not the pounding of drums beating against his ear canal. Knocking? Who knocks? Stumbling to the door, he found his cousin on the other side. Zephyr pushed past him, not waiting for an invitation. "May I help you, my prince?" Ferdinand asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. A backhand woke him up the rest of the way. Remembering himself, he went down to one knee. "That's better." The prince spat, closing the door. Exhaustion palled Zephyr's face and darkened his bloodshot eyes. Ferdinand had been notified of his prince's time in isolation, but it didn't look like his cousin's stay did much good. "What did you do to me?" Zephyr's hands accented his words until he brought one down hard on Ferdinand's face. "What's been done, my prince?" Ferdinand asked, ignoring his throbbing eye. "Everything was fine. Then you get back and..." Shivering, his prince pulled out a thin, collapsible rod concealed in his pocket. A swing extended it to the length of his arm. It didn't look like much, but Ferdinand knew it was basically a metal whip. "You will tell me, and you will reverse it." "I'm sorry, my prince. I'm sorry." "Ah! Is this some kind of rebellion? Are you torturing me for keeping you in line?" Zephyr raised the rod high above his head. "If you're tired of discipline, improve your behavior." A cacophony of notes ground in the skeleton's ear, drowning out the whistle of that swinging rod. Ferdinand ducked his head so it hit his back instead. Cold metal stung. It split his shirt and bit deep into bare flesh. Mouth clenched tight, the tinkerer didn't make a sound. Again the rod rose high above its wielder's head, and with another demand of "Tell me!" it came down with all of Zephyr's considerable strength. Ferdinand shifted so each strike hit his back or shoulders. He could take as much as any fighter, as long as nothing vital was hit. But even strategic positioning couldn't stop most blows from further splitting shirt and skin. Calculations ran through Ferdinand's head. How much longer before I'll have to stop him? Soon the blows became weaker and less consistent. Zephyr staggered to the side. When did he last sleep? Why won't it stop? Fear and anger blanketed Zephyr at the sight of his reflection. "I'm nothing like you. Stop looking at me." Head bowed deeply, Ferdinand focused on Zephyr's feet. "I apologize." The rod came down again and again until the prince couldn't swing anymore. Despairing and exhausted, Zephyr sunk to his knees. A clank ran through the room when the rod fell and rolled away, freeing the fighter to bury his face in his hands and weep. "What have I done to you?" Because the queen was from Oishi, his cousin was freer with tears than most people in North Chuzo. Even so, Ferdinand never saw his prince cry in terrified frustration. Moving closer, he knelt beside the fighter and did his best to assess and comfort his prince. He couldn't guess what his cousin was feeling, but his own heart wrenched. "I can never fix the pain I've caused." Once the tears dried up, Zephyr stumbled to his feet, pushing Ferdinand down. "You will tell me. I'll make you." Ferdinand cringed and waited for a worse beating to commence. Instead, the door opened and then closed. Risking a glance, the tinkerer raised his head. Zephyr was gone. Whatever the prince was going to do, he didn't want to know. Struggling to his feet, he staggered stiffly to the door and locked it. His skin burned. He felt blood oozing down his back and arms. Patching himself up here wasn't ideal. A scalding hot shower to clean and disinfect the open gashes was his first task. "I brought this upon myself." Even knowing this, he didn't dare turn off the music. Last thing he needed right now was that voice's commentary. Luckily, not every hit broke the skin. The problem was, one laceration or a dozen. He couldn't do much on his own. Tending to his shoulders and arms was easy enough, but without his personal medical supplies, his back was out of the question. He'd sleep on his belly tonight and hope it was enough, until disembarking tomorrow evening. At least there was music to distract him. "Ozar!" John yelled and ran down the gangplank, leaping into his brother's arms. "Ah, baby brother." The impossibly tall man squeezed him tightly, leaving just enough to let him breathe. "I love you. Our niece has told us all about your little adventure. I look forward to hearing the tale from you." "Of course." John half wrung his brother's neck, returning the hug. Tears blurred his eyes, and that haunting song floated through his mind. "I love you too. I've missed home so much." "Home's missed you." Ozar slowly lowered John until his feet touched the ground. When the man stood back up, the thinker found himself facing the lower part of his brother's chest. This was weird. It wasn't long ago he stared into Ozar's belly button. Have I really grown this much? "Where's Ferdinand?" Ozar's deep, black eyes scanned the crowd. "You mean he's coming with us? Why didn't he say anything?" "Yeah, Mom's request was granted. She wants to discuss what he knows concerning Evelyn." "Really?" John asked his mom to have Ferdinand brought here, but he didn't know if it would happen, especially with the Tinkerer being summoned home for such an important event. Worse, there was no reason he could give beyond enjoying time with Evelyn. But Oya's words gnawed at him. He couldn't ignore them. I'm glad it worked. I'll get him. John was halfway up the plank when the skeleton appeared, a bag in one hand and a box in the other. Ferdinand moved stiffly, as though trying to keep everything above the belt still. Would you like a hand? Surprisingly, the gent didn't argue or put up a fight. That box. Where did you get this? It was a gift. Really? I thought Oya wanted the violin for herself. Strange, isn't it? A little. What happened to your eye? I was clumsy. John raised an eyebrow. Why are you walking funny? Straight-faced, Ferdinand returned the gesture as if the question was entirely ridiculous. Those beds are far from comfortable. Ah, true. John stretched his neck, holding the beautifully carved box secure. Ozar's waiting. Though John ran back down, Ferdinand moved more conservatively. It was truly amazing. The two brothers standing side by side couldn't look any different. Ozar was broad and heavily muscled with coarse, black hair and midnight-deep eyes. The man also made John look deathly pale by comparison, which was saying something considering how pale Ferdinand looked next to John. Rich dark skin all but shone in the morning sun, unlike the two boys who were washed out by it. It didn't help that John and Ferdinand never got any darker despite living on the islands and spending a good bit of time outdoors. If John didn't look almost exactly like Father Artemis, Ferdinand would suspect the Dinta was a claimed child. And John wasn't the only one. Of the 8 brothers, 5 were like Ozar, the splitting image of their mother. Only 2 took after their dad, though Samuel had a bit more of mother's features than John, and 1 shared no genetic relation. Heavy drums kicked in, drowning out everything, forcing Ferdinand to lower the volume. I should turn it off. Something cold and heavy formed in his gut at that thought. Turning it off, that... Shaking his head, Ferdinand ignored the sensation he couldn't identify and focused on one he could. He was scared. Even John noticed something was off back at the hospital, and his ally didn't pay much attention to him. Here, dozens of eyes watched him constantly, and that voice wasn't the only thing he had to worry about. Following behind, Ferdinand stopped a good distance from the man. The last thing he needed was a death hug. They were painful enough without a flogged back. Screaming joined drums and metallic notes. I should turn it off, but... Bowing, he greeted his older ally. Thank you for your hospitality, Ozar Hayo. You didn't have to wait for me. Unlike John and the other Artemis boys who were Dintas, Ozar was heir, and it didn't make sense. With no female offspring, heirship should have fallen to the eldest son, but Ozar was second in line. Don't be preposterous, little brother. We're going to the same place. He stepped forward, offering the usual Artemis greetings. Holding up a shaky hand halted the man. Ferdinand didn't know when it happened, but John's family claimed him as a 9th son. He didn't ask to be, neither did he like it. But you don't say no to your strongest ally concerning something like that. Normally, he wouldn't be so blatantly rude to the heir of an allied country. But today wasn't a normal day. Please, it was a difficult trip. One look at the boy's clammy, pallid complexion was all the Hayo needed. I understand. After Ozar's impossibly deep voice finished reverberating through his bones, the Hayo led them to the waiting vehicle. Rude or not, Ferdinand slipped inside while the brothers played with the luggage. The extra time didn't help him find a comfortable way to sit. Leaning forward to rest bony elbows on knobby knees was the best he found. At least the Artemises were a family of giants. The roomy car meant he didn't have to worry about being bumped or pushed. When the 2 princes finally got in, John sat close to his big brother. The car took off. So did John and Ozar's ramblings. It was a good 30 minutes before either realized Ferdinand hadn't made a sound. You're looking tired, little brother. Ozar studied him with concern. Despite being half a year younger, they called Ferdinand little brother, while John held the title baby brother. It was weird, but Ferdinand would rather be called little over baby any day. The trip was rough. I didn't get much sleep. Then lay down and take a nap till we arrive, the giant offered generously. Ferdinand couldn't accept that invitation, but despite all his effort and the cacophony in his ear, sleep eventually seized him.